This video is going to cover the difference between relative and absolute cell references. So we're going to go ahead and get started by creating a formula that adds B7, B8, and B9 and places the total in cell B10. So what I'm going to do is come over here to my auto sum button, and I'm going to choose sum, and it selects cells B7 through B9. And what I'm going to do is I'm going to press enter, and that it fills in the formula for me. Now I want that same formula to go across this range here, all the way across this range here. And so basically what I'm going to do is I'm going to copy this formula across using a feature called the autofill feature. And what it's going to do is it's going to pick up the relative reference, meaning this formula is looking 1, 2, 3 cells and adding those 3 cells. So when I copy over one column, it's still going to look at 1, 2, 3 cells, and it's going to give me the solution to that problem. So this is called a relative reference. This formula, as I copy it over, is going to pick up the relative reference. So it is going to look 1, 2, 3 cells, and it's going to add those cells. So if I look at this particular cell, it is now adding C7 to C9. This one is adding D7 to D9, and this one is adding E7 to E9. So that is picking up the relative cell reference. Now if I come over here, I can do the same thing. I can come up to my auto sum, I can choose sum, and it adds B7 through E7. So I press enter, and what's happening is this particular formula is looking 1, 2, 3, 4 cells, and it's adding those cells. So if I copy this formula down one row, it looks at the same range but one row lower. And then when I copy it down again, it looks at the same range but one row lower. So I come back up here, I go to my autofill handle, and I autofill down. And then when I look at this particular area in my formula bar, it tells me B8 to E8. And then this one, if I look at my formula bar, B9 to E9. Here we go there. So that is picking up the relative reference. Now, let's say that I want to know what new totals would be if my yearly totals would increase by, let's say, 20% next year. So I'm going to put expected increase, and then in this one, I'm going to do 20% here. So now what I want to do is I want to create a formula that looks at this cell and then looks at this cell. Okay? And when I copy that formula down, I want this cell to look here and then back up here. When I copy it down even further, I want it to look here and then back up here. So I have to do something a little bit special with this formula. I have to make what's called an absolute cell reference. I have to make sure that I tell the computer to continually look back at this cell. This is my constant. So every single one of these cells needs to multiply what's in this column to what's up here in cell G6. I'm going to come right here in cell G7 and get started. So this is a multiplication problem. I'm going to do equal this times this, and I need to make sure to make that absolute cell reference. So what I have to do is I have to put the absolute symbols around both the column and the row. Now the quickest way to do this is to use my F4 key. And you'll see that if I press it one time, it puts a $sign before column G and before row 6, making that absolute. If I were to press it again, it does what's called a mixed cell reference, and if I press it again, it does another mixed cell reference. So make sure that you only press it one time to make cell G6 absolute. And then what I have to do is, this is a multiplication problem that would basically figure out what the 20% increase is, but I want to know what the 20% increase is in addition to my current yearly totals. So I'm going to plus it back to cell F7. Now I'm going to press enter. And if you look at this formula, it's going to look at cell F7, multiply it to cell G6, and I've made G6 absolute, so that's going to be a constant in this formula, and then it needs to be added back to that original yearly total there. So I'm going to go ahead and autofill this down, and what I want you to notice is that when I look at this formula, it looks here and here. When I look at this formula, it looks here and here, and that's exactly what I wanted it to do. So by typing my formula correctly in this cell, I've said, hey, I want you to continually look back to G6 to multiply to the increase. Now the benefit is I can come back up here and I could say, well, what if I increased it by 10%? Or what if I increased it by 25%? All three of these formulas will update because I created my initial formula correctly. So that's the difference between relative and absolute.